If you're wondering what the largest tires you can fit on your 3rd Gen Tundra are, you're in the right place. You probably knew that when you clicked on the video. In this wheel and tire fitment guide, we're covering everything you need to know, whether you use your Tundra for overlanding, off-roading, or it's just your work rig that's in need of a new look. This guide covers the 3rd Gen Toyota Tundra 2022 and up. We covered the 2nd Gen already, it's linked down below, but the 3rd Gen did get a lot of upgrades, so it's only right that it gets its own guide. There are big changes to the frame and the suspension setup. The suspension pickup points are 8-inch wider in the rear. Of course, this dramatically changes things. 35s are pretty commonplace on these trucks. In fact, the 3rd Gen can fit 37s without too much hassle, where a 2nd Gen had to be jacked up to the moon. Now, before we get into it, be sure to hit like and subscribe on the video if this helps you out, and drop a comment down below with what fitment guide we should do next. So let's get started with the basics as always. It's a 6-on-139 bolt pattern, M14 by 1.5 lug thread. The center bore is 95.2 millimeters and the lug nut torque is 96 foot-pounds. The wheels are not compatible between the 3rd Gen Tundra and older models due to the change in lug pattern. Unfortunately, this means we cannot fit 2nd Gen TRD wheels without an adapter. The old Tundras are 5-on-150, which is a really hard bolt pattern to get wheels for, so 6-on-139 is a welcome change. Now, from the factory, you're either getting 18-inch wheels found on the lower trim levels and the TRD Pro, 20-inch wheels on the higher trim levels and the TRD Off-Road, or the Donk Spec 22-inch wheels on the new Capstone. Why they did this, I don't know. What size should you choose for aftermarket wheels? Well, 17s, 18s, and 20s are all possible. Most 17s will work, but not all of them, so check before you buy. If you have a Capstone, throw those 22s directly into your local dumpster or Facebook Marketplace ASAP. Honestly, I cannot fathom why they would do this, but again, on to width and offset. Of course, on a truck, tire width is more important than rim width. So anything from a factory 7.5-inch width up to a 9 will do the job. The factory offset is very high, plus 60 to be exact. And for stock height trucks, a low positive offset, say around 15 to 12, will give you a nice aggressive stance. For trucks with a leveling kit or a lift, you can consider going with a 0 or even a -12 offset, depending on how much poke you like. Of course, you can always go super wide 22x14, 24x14, but you gotta cut your truck up. Now, tires wise, these depend heavily on what factory suspension you have. We will of course break it down with examples in the next section down below, so just kind of stay tuned. Now, as far as making things complicated, Toyota are experts in this, and so of course they made different suspensions for almost every trim level. There are 6 of them to be exact. Luckily, we can group some of them together as they are fairly similar. So my lovely editor is going to put a chart up on the screen here, and it's also available at the link down below to our full fitment guide on this truck. Highly recommend checking this out in guide format. The videos are great, but when you want to reference back to it, it's a lot easier to kind of figure it out with it sitting in front of you. Anyway, long story short, you have 6 suspension options on these trucks, which means that if your buddy has a TRD Pro and you have a Capstone, one of you is going to have fitment issues if you try to swap wheels around. So be sure you either know what trim level you have, or you just lift or level the truck anyway. In short, the TRD Sport is the shortest, the SR/SR5 is the baseline height on these, while the TRD Sport and TRD Pro both have 1.1 inches of lift in the front. Now, if you plan to raise your 3rd Gen Tundra higher or run suspension with more travel, you want to look into aftermarket extended brake lines. The factory lines are short and don't allow much travel. They can become stretched when the suspension fully droops. And guys, highly recommend having functioning brakes. I feel like that's just an obvious thing, but for what it's going to cost you versus not being able to stop, there you go. Now, leveling wise, TRD Pro and off-road trucks are effectively leveled from the factory, so this is really for everything else. Leveling your Tundra is a great way to get the same clearance as the TRD Pro without spending like actual money. Most kits will give you somewhere between 1.5 to 2 inches of lift in the front, and this is a little bit more than the TRD models, but it's definitely not going to be like Carolina squat status by any means. We have a ton of these leveling kits on our website. They are super affordable, and it's not going to dramatically change the ride quality or how wheels fit or anything like that. Basically, in other words, the suspension on your TRD Sport won't magically feel like it has Fox 2.5 coilovers, but it's just a nice, cheap little upgrade. So Lifting wise, 35 should be possible just a level, but if you want even more, you can of course lift your truck and it will add the extra oomph needed to run up to 37s depending on how high you jack that thing up into the air. With a TRD Pro and off-road, you could consider something like a Westcott preload collar kit. Because the 3rd gen has rear coil suspension, this kit allows you to run a front and rear collar on the shocks that provides 3 inches of front lift and 1.5 in the rear. The next option would be going to a more traditional lift kit. TRD makes a 3-inch factory lift, and no, it's not the same as the TRD off-road suspension. It isn't cheap, but it is super comprehensive and redundant and Toyota quality. It includes geometry correcting parts, meaning you maintain drivability while adding extra suspension travel. There are cheaper ways to get a similar 3-inch lift. ReadyLift makes a kit that reuses the factory shocks. It's not as complete as the TRD kit, but that is reflected in the price. It obviously just depends on your level of how much of a purist you are and what quality you want. ReadyLift also makes a 6-inch kit along with Icon, Rough Country, and a whole bunch of other brands. You probably don't need to look at these as much as we want to sell them to you unless you're considering 37s or even larger. You really don't need more than a 35 on your truck in like 95% of applications, especially if you're just driving it around town. So with all of the different suspensions sorted out, you've probably fallen asleep by this point in time. We can actually get into the reason that you're here, wheel and tire setups.
Whoa, whoa. Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
Now, no lift wheel and tire setups for the SR, SR5 Limited, and Platinum are what we're going to talk about first, and these are for stock suspension trucks with no factory leveling. So everything besides the TRD Pro and TRD Off-Road. The capstone suspension is TBD, but if you have a capstone, again, you're probably just... The TRD guys should be able to copy these setups, but it might be a little bit tighter. First one we're looking at is 295 65/20s on factory wheels. These are the OEM 20x8 with a 60 offset, and the tires are Nitto Recon Grapplers in 295 65/20. These effectively equate to a 34-inch tire and have no rubbing issues. And if you just want to stick with the factory wheels and save some money and only upgrade the tires, you probably want to know what's the largest tire I can fit. You want something around a 34-inch tire for a zero rub confirmed fit on factory suspension. For those with 18s, 285/70/18 or 295/70/18 will work. For 20s, 295/65/20 is almost exactly 34 inches, and that is what this SR5 is running. The tires shown here are Nitto Recon Grapplers, and this setup doesn't rub and still has a little bit of room to spare, so if you hit a big bump, you're not going to have an issue. Now next up, we're looking at some KMC KM722 Technic in 20x9 with an 18 offset all the way around. These are wrapped up in Nittos once again, this time the Terra Grappler in a 285/60/20. This one is not lifted, and there are no rubbing issues to speak of. Aftermarket wheels are going to always be way lower offset than the factory and therefore have a better stance. The issue is this will also give you less front clearance. With a no lift, no level setup, you really want to keep it at a 15 or higher offset. Excess poke at stock height kind of looks goofy, and so you don't want to go crazy with it. This 4x4 Limited is on 20-inch KMC wheels, 20x9 with an 18 offset, and this is pretty much the outer limit of what you'll want at stock ride height. This truck is running a slightly smaller tire, the 285/60/20, which comes out to 33.5 inches tall. Remember, factory offset is plus 60, so this is considerably lower, meaning, of course, less clearance. The owner of this truck claims there's zero rubbing on it. We have no reason to doubt that. Now that we're done with the OEM stuff, let's get into leveled trucks, and whether you put leveling kit on a lower trim or have a TRD Pro or off-road, which seem to be super popular on these, you definitely are going to want to consider just jumping straight to a 35-inch tire. Sometimes other mods are needed, like repinning the fender liners, but generally speaking, they're not too difficult to fit. Of course, it does depend on your wheel offset, so we're going to take a look at a few setups. Now guys, anytime we get into something like a 35 or larger tire, obviously there are plastic pieces that may need to be removed or trimmed. That's something we get as a common question when people are ordering these setups, like, is it a direct bolt-on fit? And generally, yes, but again, your definition of direct bolt-on and mine may differ a little bit in the sense that removing a mud flap or cutting a little piece of plastic away may not be direct bolt-on to you. Just bear that in mind on any of these setups that you see here, that you may have to do a little bit of trimming or removal. This first one is on Fuel Rebels 18x9 with a 20 offset, and these are wrapped up in Nitto Recon Grapplers 295/70/18 tires. This one is leveled with a Rough Country kit, and there are no rubbing issues on this truck. With 295/70/18s, This may or may not actually need that rough country leveling kit. You could try it without leveling to see if it rubs, but chances are you'll wind up needing it, and honestly, it just looks a lot better anyway. With the leveling kit, there's plenty of room to spare, and so this SR5 Tundra has zero rubbing issues as it sits. This is also a really good look at how 20 offset wheels fit. If you don't like a lot of poke, this offset or something very similar is going to be exactly what you want to go for. Anything from say like a 25 down to like a 20 is going to fit basically the same way. And so for your kind of level like stock fitment, this is the tree that you're barking up. Now here's the setup that I think many of you guys came here for. We're looking at some JDM wheels, Rays 07X ALAP 18x8 with a 20 offset. These ones are wrapped up in one of our favorite off-road tires pretty much ever, the Mickey Thompson Baja Boss in a 305/70/18. This truck has the front mud flaps removed and the fender liners were repinned. And so this is kind of addressing that question. Can you fit 35s on a stock TRD Pro? Yep, but at the very least, you got to remove your mud flaps and repin the fender liners. Worst case scenario, you got to do a little bit of plastic trimming. With a little bit of work, this 2024 TRD Pro was able to fit these Mickey Thompsons 305/70/18 or 34.8 inches. We're just going to round up to 0.2 there. These are 20 offset wheels on an 8-inch width, and compared with a lower offset, these will not require as much work to fit. Remember, the TRD Pro is only about 1 inch higher in the front compared with non-TRD trucks, so if you want to copy this on your SR5, a leveling kit will be more than sufficient. In fact, it'll actually offer you a little bit more clearance than the TRD Pro, so you may not even need to trim. Now, we've done most of the mild setups. So everything that you'll see from here on out will have some sort of front and rear lift. It could be as simple as the Westcott collar kit, the TRD 3-inch lift kit, or some kind of aftermarket setup. This first truck that we're looking at is sitting on Lock off-road wheels. They come in at a 17x9 with a 0 offset all the way around. Lock Off-Road is a really hot up-and-coming brand. They have awesome styles for a lot less money than you're going to pay for something comparable. Check them out on our website if you have a Tundra or really any truck. I think you guys are really going to like these. These are wrapped up in Goodyear Wranglers 315/70/17 tires. This one has an Eibach Stage 1 lift kit. There is slight rubbing without any modifications. Fender liner mod will fix this, or you can just drive it and let it self-clearance because the tires are going to chew through plastic more than plastic's going to chew through the tires. This is our first look at 17s on a 3rd gen and also our first example of a lifted truck. This one is an Eibach Stage 1 kit, which is a 2.6-inch front, 1.1-inch rear. As we know, this tire size will work with a simple leveling kit. However, considering these are 0 offset wheels, you might need to hack your truck up to make them work. With the lift, the only extra work that was needed was a simple repinning of the fender liners. No, the aftermarket bumper is not necessary, but it looks pretty badass, so you might as well just do it if you're already there. Now, it wouldn't be a guide on a JDM truck, although I don't think these are made in Japan, but still a JDM truck in my eyes, without some Volk Racing TE37 XTs, 17x8.5 with a -10 offset. These are wrapped up in Toyo Open Country RTs, 35, 12, 50, 18s. What is with you guys buying Volk Racing wheels and Toyo tires? I swear, every Volk off-road order we get gets Toyos. It's very odd. Good setup though. This one is the Westcott collar kit on TRD Pro suspension. These are true 35-inch tires in flotation sizing. So this is your 35 here, guys. The mud flaps were deleted, but otherwise the truck is stock. This is a TRD Pro with the Westcott collar kit. This kit gives you a little bit more clearance, but does not give you any extra travel. It actually removes droop. This truck is running true 35s, whereas the last one we looked at was just under. The mud flaps had to go, but otherwise, no clearance issues on this one. Of course, TE37 XTs look just as tough on this generation as they did on the previous. These are the first negative offset wheels that we've seen in this guide, and there's a good amount of poke. If you don't like this much, there are 15 offset TE37 XTs or even more options in an 8-inch width, and obviously you can also go even wider if you want a more aggressive setup. The TE37 XT is a great looking wheel. It is super strong. It is very affordable for what you get, which is probably the best quality off-road wheel you can buy, and we see it as a super popular setup on any of the Toyota trucks. This next truck is on Gramlite 57 DRX, 17x8.5 with a 0 offset. These are going to be wrapped up in a set of Falcon Wild Peak AT4Ws. These are 35, 11, 50, 17. So again, these are a true 35-inch tire, but 1 inch narrower than the previous setup that we looked at. This one has an Eibach Pro lift kit on it, JBA control arms, Icon bump stops, BOTCK track bar correction kit. While we're looking at JDM wheels, how about some gram lights? We have to say Mag Blue is probably one of the best finishes for these wheels, and on an ice cap white Tundra like this, just absolute chef's kiss. This is another Eibach Pro kit, but this time it's paired up with TRD off-road suspension. Once again, 35-inch tires, but as I mentioned before, these are 1150s, which is an inch narrower than the typical 1250. If you're concerned about rubbing or don't want as much sidewall bulge, the slightly thinner tire gives you a surprising amount of clearance both for the upper control arms and for the fenders. Now we're getting towards the end here, but we're going to take a look at a couple of Tundras with 37-inch tires. We could do an entire fitment guide on just this topic, but the basic gist is the higher the lift, the less trimming that you need. Most lift companies recommend at least 3 inches to fit 37-inch tires, so a 3-inch TRD lift kit will work, or a comparable aftermarket kit from Dobson's, Fox, or similar brands. Technically, there's not a huge difference between a collar or spacer lift kit. However, the primary benefit is that you'll be able to properly set your alignment up, or more likely your alignment shop will probably be able to do that for you. Plus, the extra height will mean less trimming on your truck. We haven't covered trimming yet, as not much is required with 37s, and we try to stay away from it on these newer, more expensive vehicles. 37s will require a bit of work, so don't go on our website, click 37s on negative offset wheels, and be like, they don't fit. One of the first places to start is by removing the factory crash bracket. It sits behind the fender liners on the rear of the front fender arches. Unbolt and peel back the fender liner. It's then simply removed with 2 13mm bolts. This allows the liner to be pushed a lot further in, so you're not going to have any rubbing there. We do have pictures of how to do this, again in our fitment guide, which is going to be linked down below. The next area that needs attention is right next door on the rocker panels. This can be taped and trimmed with a rotary tool for a nice clean line, or you can just never go full lock and hope you don't hit it. You can also take off this little nub located next to the bracket that we already removed, but you really should test it and make sure it's necessary before you start cutting. This one will take an angle grinder, and remember to paint the exposed steel afterwards if you don't like rust. If you go with a higher lift kit, say 5-inch, 6-inch, you might be able to get away with a simple inner fender repin, the same mod that's come up a bunch in this guide, or even just not require anything if a little bit of rubbing doesn't bug you. Generally, when you get into 37s, guys, you don't want to try to squeeze them in on 3-inch lift. I would just go for the 6-inch at this point in time. Yes, it's more money, but you have a truck that can be fully reversed back to stock if you need it, as opposed to something that you've started trimming. On a newer vehicle, you really don't want to cut it up if you can avoid it. So this first Tundra we're looking at is sitting on 1552 Turbo Mac HDs. They're a 17x8.5 with a 0 offset all the way around. These are wrapped up in Toyo Open Country RTs, 37 1250 17s. This one has the Dobinson's IMS 3.2 extended brake lines. The front bumper is cut, the crash bracket is removed, and these are 17-inch 1552 Turbo Mac HD wheels, and they look absolutely tiny when wrapped in 37s. These tires are a true 37, and this truck is able to fit them with that Dobinson's 3.2 IMS lift kit. To make everything fit, this truck needed all of the trimming that we just talked about. Plus, the front bumper was cut about 3 to 4 inches up. You could also run an aftermarket bumper instead of fully cutting the front bumper. You could also just radius the bumper if you were so inclined. The next Tundra we're looking at is sitting on RRW RRH 7H wheels, 17x8.5 with a 0 offset once again. Tires wise, we're talking Yokohama Geolander MTs, 37 1250 17s. This one has King 2.5s in the front and the rear with the adjuster set to 3 inches of lift. It also has a King rear sway bar drop, JBA upper control arms, Icon front diff drop, Icon front sway bar relocation, Dobinson's trailing arms, control arms, and track bar in the rear, Dobinson's rear coils. So this truck has significant suspension upgrades. This also has an aftermarket front bumper. This is another setup on 37s, but this TRD 4x4 is also running a 3-inch lift with, like I said, pretty much a full catalog of suspension to go with it. The wheels are from Relations Race, and they measure 17x8.5 with a 0 offset. They're wrapped in true 37-inch tires from Yokohama, and this setup just looks absolutely mean. This one still needed the bracket removed, but not much more. With an aftermarket bumper, you can add extra caster, which shifts the wheel forward in the arches. Most of the rubbing occurs in the rear when turning lock to lock, and this gives you more space, equating to less trimming, but without the bumper, this just shifts the rubbing to the front. So let's bring things all back together because we talked about a whole bunch of trucks today. From 33s to 37s, the 3rd Gen Tundra can do a little bit of everything. With all the factory suspension options, it can get pretty confusing. But the long and short is most of these trucks can fit 35s with a simple leveling kit or even the factory suspension in the case of the TRD models. Whatever setup you go with, be sure, once you get it dialed in, to add it to the vehicle gallery on our website once you get those 35s mounted up. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment down below with what vehicle we should do a fitment guide on next, and I'll see you in the next one.